Have you ever seen those beautiful cottage gardens online? Overflowing with flowers, buzzing with bees, glowing softly in the evening sun. And wondered if real gardens could actually look like that. Because in reality, many cottage garden flowers only stay attractive for a short time before fading, collapsing after rain, or struggling the moment weather conditions become difficult. Some demand constant watering. Some bloom once and disappear and become weak and messy halfway through summer. But certain plants are completely different. Some flowers grow stronger every year. They tolerate heat, wind, poor soil, and occasional neglect while continuing to spread naturally and attract pollinators nonstop. Those are the plants we're focusing on today. These are cottage garden flowers that truly thrive. The kinds of plants that create that wild, romantic storybook look without turning gardening into constant work. And a few of them are so resilient that they almost seem impossible to ruin. 1. Foxglove. Foxglove is one of those rare flowers capable of changing the entire feeling of a garden almost instantly. The moment its tall, flowering stems rise above nearby plants, the space suddenly feels softer, older, and almost magical. But what surprises many gardeners is that foxglove offers more than beauty alone. It's also far tougher than it appears. Once established, foxglove adapts well to cooler conditions, partial shade, and even less than perfect soil. While many flowering plants struggle in lower light, foxglove often performs beautifully there, bringing height and color into areas where other flowers fail. Its tall stems become lined with bell-shaped blooms that can stretch more than 5 feet high. Flower colors range from rich purple and deep pink to soft cream, peach, and white. Inside each bloom are spotted patterns that almost seem designed to guide bees directly inside, and pollinators absolutely love them. During peak flowering, foxgloves become filled with constant bee activity, bringing movement and life into the garden. One of the most valuable things about foxglove in cottage gardens is the way it naturally reproduces. Most foxgloves are biennials. During the first year, the plant focuses on developing roots and leafy growth. Then in the second year, it bursts into dramatic bloom. But if some flowers are allowed to produce seed, new foxgloves begin appearing naturally around the garden over time. This self-seeding habit creates the impression that the flowers planted themselves exactly where they wanted to grow, a defining feature of traditional cottage-style gardens. Foxgloves prefer moist but well-drained soil and usually perform best with morning sun or light afternoon shade. In hotter climates, intense afternoon heat can stress the plants. And although they look delicate, mature foxgloves are surprisingly resilient once rooted properly. One important thing to remember is that foxglove is toxic if eaten, so placement around children or pets should be considered carefully. But visually, very few flowers create the same dramatic emotional effect. Foxglove doesn't simply add flowers to a garden, it adds atmosphere. 2. Delphiniums bring some of the most dramatic vertical color any cottage garden can have. When they bloom well, they become impossible to ignore. Tall flower spikes rise high above surrounding plants, covered in dense blossoms colored in shades of blue, lavender, purple, pink, and white. Unlike subtle flowers that quietly blend into borders, delphiniums immediately command attention. And despite their elegant appearance, they can become surprisingly strong and dependable when grown in suitable conditions. Delphiniums grow best in cooler climates with rich, well-drained soil and consistent moisture. They dislike intense heat, but in milder regions, they often return year after year with impressive strength. Their biggest challenge is not weakness. It's the sheer size of their blooms. The flower spikes can become so large and heavy that strong rain or wind sometimes causes them to bend, which is why staking is often helpful. But the visual reward is enormous. A mature delphinium covered in flowers creates towering columns of color that few other plants can match. Pollinators love them too. Bees move constantly between the blossoms, while butterflies drift around the tall flower spikes throughout summer. One reason delphiniums work so beautifully in cottage gardens is the balance they create. Even though the flower spikes are bold and dramatic, the finely divided foliage underneath remains soft and airy, preventing the plant from feeling heavy or rigid. That contrast helps create the relaxed, layered look that makes cottage gardens feel so natural. To keep delphiniums performing well, faded flower spikes should be removed after blooming. In many regions, this encourages a second round of flowers later in the season. Adding compost in spring, mulching around the roots, and protecting plants from strong wind also helps improve long-term growth. And once mature delphiniums settle into the garden, they become unforgettable focal points. Even a single row can completely transform the structure and atmosphere of an entire landscape. 3. Coneflowers are one of the best examples of a flower that combines strength with beauty effortlessly. They handle drought with ease, tolerate poor soil, survive intense summer heat, and still continue blooming for months without losing their appeal. Originally growing across the prairies of North America, coneflowers evolved in rough natural conditions. Because of that, they're far more resilient than many traditional ornamental flowers. Once mature, their deep roots pull moisture from deep below the soil surface, helping them stay healthy during dry weather when more delicate plants begin struggling. But toughness alone isn't why gardeners love them so much. It's the flowers themselves. Large daisy-like petals surround bold raised centers, creating blooms that instantly stand out in any garden. Traditional varieties display rich purple-pink tones, while modern cultivars now include shades of white, yellow, orange, peach, red, and even green. And the pollinator activity around them never seems to stop. Bees gather across the central cones, butterflies move constantly between flowers, and later in the season, birds feed from the seed heads. That long-lasting usefulness is one reason coneflowers fit so naturally into cottage gardens. Even after flowering ends, the plants continue adding texture and structure through autumn and winter. Their dried seed heads catch frost beautifully, while also providing food for wildlife during colder months. Coneflowers also blend effortlessly with other cottage garden plants. Paired with ornamental grasses, yarrow, black-eyed Susans, or salvias, they help create landscapes that feel loose, layered, and full of movement. These flowers prefer sunny locations with good drainage, but beyond that, they require surprisingly little attention. They don't need constant feeding or endless watering. Instead, they quietly become stronger and more reliable every year. And perhaps that's their greatest strength. Coneflowers don't simply survive difficult conditions, they help anchor the entire garden. 4. Hollyhock. If one flower perfectly represents the classic cottage garden look, it's probably hollyhock. Tall stems, endless blooms, and old-fashioned charm make these plants feel like they belong in another century. Hollyhocks grow upward incredibly fast, often reaching 6 to 8 feet tall within a single season. Their towering flower-covered stems rise beside walls, fences, and pathways like living pillars of color. And once blooming begins, the display lasts for weeks. Large blossoms continue opening gradually up the stems, creating long-lasting waves of color instead of a single short bloom period. What surprises many gardeners is how resilient hollyhocks can become once established. They prefer full sun and decent airflow, but after settling in, they tolerate dry conditions surprisingly well and often reseed themselves aggressively. Much like foxgloves, hollyhocks naturally spread through self-seeding. Allow a few seed heads to mature and new plants will begin appearing throughout the garden on their own. Over time, this creates the relaxed, overflowing appearance that defines traditional cottage gardens, where flowers seem to wander naturally through the landscape. Pollinators are also heavily attracted to hollyhocks. Bees disappear deep into the large blossoms, while hummingbirds frequently visit taller varieties during the peak flowering. One challenge gardeners sometimes face is rust disease, particularly in humid climates. But proper spacing and strong airflow help reduce problems significantly. Many modern varieties are also far more resistant than older traditional types. And the visual reward is enormous. Very few flowers create the same towering romantic atmosphere. Hollyhocks don't simply grow beside structures. They soften walls, fences, and pathways, blending buildings into the garden itself and making the entire space feel older, softer, and more timeless. 5. Yarrow. Yarrow is one of the most dependable and hardworking flowers a garden can have. At first, it may seem fairly simple. Clusters of tiny flowers sit above soft, feathery foliage without the dramatic appearance of larger ornamental blooms. But beneath that modest look is a plant that quietly improves the entire garden. Yarrow thrives in intense heat, tolerates drought easily, handles poor soil without complaint, attracts helpful insects, and continues flowering for an impressively long time. In many ways, it behaves less like a fragile garden flower and more like a wild plant perfectly adapted to work alongside gardeners. Classic yarrow varieties are known for white and yellow blooms, but modern selections now include shades of pink, peach, coral, red, and deep golden tones. And because the flower heads are broad and flat, pollinators gather around them constantly. Bees, butterflies, hoverflies, and lacewings all regularly visit yarrow, turning it into an important support plant for the garden ecosystem. That matters because the best cottage gardens aren't simply collections of flowers. They function like living ecosystems filled with movement, pollinators, and beneficial insects. And yarrow helps support that balance. Its deep roots improve soil structure over time. Its flowers attract insects that help reduce pest populations naturally, and its drought tolerance keeps color alive during the hottest and driest weeks of summer. Visually, yarrow also works as an excellent connecting plant. The soft, airy foliage balances stronger flower shapes, while the flat flower clusters create contrast beside taller vertical blooms, like foxgloves and delphiniums. Another advantage is how easy it is to divide. Mature clumps can be separated every few years and replanted elsewhere, allowing a single plant to gradually spread throughout larger sections of the garden. And unlike many flowers that struggle during dry summers, yarrow often looks strongest exactly when other plants begin fading. It thrives in the conditions that weaken many traditional garden flowers. 6. Catmint. Some garden plants constantly demand attention. Catmint does the opposite. It quietly spreads into soft, flowing mounds of color, blooms for months, attracts pollinators nonstop, and somehow makes every nearby flower look even better without overpowering the garden itself. That's one reason experienced gardeners rely on it so heavily. At first glance, catmint may not appear as dramatic as giant roses or towering foxgloves, but once the plant begins flowering, the entire atmosphere of the garden changes. Its gray-green foliage and masses of purple-blue flowers create the relaxed, romantic feeling that defines classic cottage gardens. And unlike delicate, high-maintenance flowers, catmint is remarkably forgiving. It tolerates drought extremely well, grows happily in poor soil, handles summer heat with ease, and continues blooming with very little effort from the gardener. In fact, overwatering is often one of the few things that can seriously harm it. Catmint actually prefers slightly drier and tougher conditions. Once established, it becomes one of the easiest and most reliable perennials in the garden. Another reason gardeners love catmint is its exceptionally long flowering season. Many cottage garden flowers bloom intensely for a short time and then disappear. Catmint can continue blooming for months, especially when lightly trimmed after the first major wave of flowers fades. That quick pruning often encourages an entirely fresh round of blooms. And pollinators absolutely cover the plants during summer. Bees seem especially attracted to catmint. On warm afternoons, the flowers almost appear alive with constant movement and sound. This nonstop activity helps the garden feel vibrant and full of life. Catmint also solves another important design problem in cottage gardens: harsh structure. Gardens filled only with upright flowers can sometimes feel crowded or stiff. Catmint softens pathways, borders, and edges with its flowing shape, helping different plants blend together naturally. That's why professional garden designers use plants like this so often. They create movement and softness between stronger forms. One of the most famous cottage garden combinations is catmint planted beneath roses. The cool purple-blue flowers paired with soft pink or white roses create a timeless romantic look that never seems to go out of style. The contrast works perfectly. Roses bring elegance and structure, while catmint adds softness and flowing texture underneath. And even when roses temporarily stop blooming, catmint continues filling the space with color. Another hidden strength is durability. Deer usually avoid it, rabbits rarely damage it, and most pests leave it alone completely. The foliage also releases a gentle herbal fragrance when touched, adding another layer of sensory experience to the garden. In many ways, catmint captures the true spirit of cottage gardening, beauty that feels natural instead of forced. It doesn't require perfect conditions or endless care. It simply grows, spreads gently, blooms for months, and quietly makes the entire garden feel softer, calmer, and more alive. 7. Shasta daisies. Some flowers impress with drama. Others stand out through elegance. But Shasta daisies bring something just as powerful into a garden: a sense of brightness and joy. The moment they begin blooming, the entire garden feels lighter and more welcoming. Their crisp white petals surrounding golden centers create one of the most familiar and timeless flower shapes in the world. And although the flowers appear simple, that simplicity is exactly what makes them so effective in cottage gardens. They bring balance. In gardens filled with strong colors and layered textures, Shasta daisies act almost like visual light, softening intense shades and brightening darker areas, while creating that cheerful summer atmosphere people associate with traditional countryside gardens. And unlike fragile flowers that bloom briefly before fading away, Shasta daisies are impressively durable. They flower heavily for long periods, and often continue blooming through much of summer with very little maintenance. Mature plants gradually expand into large clumps that return reliably year after year, naturally filling borders with waves of white flowers. That natural abundance is one reason cottage gardeners love them so much. Another major advantage is adaptability. Once established, Shasta daisies tolerate heat well, handle occasional drought, and rarely become difficult to grow. Give them sunlight and reasonably well-drained soil and they usually perform beautifully. Their sturdy stems are another benefit because they hold up far better against wind and rain than many softer cottage flowers. One of the greatest strengths of Shasta daisies is how easily they blend with other plants. They pair beautifully with lavender, roses, coneflowers, salvias, foxgloves, catmint, and ornamental grasses. Their neutral white flowers naturally tie different colors and textures together throughout the garden. That's why professional garden designers use them so frequently. Pollinators love them too. Bees and butterflies regularly visit the open blooms, turning even simple plantings into busy pollinator-friendly spaces. And there's also something deeply nostalgic about daisies. They remind people of open summer meadows, old cottage gardens, and childhood memories. They create comfort and familiarity in a way few flowers can. Not every unforgettable garden needs rare or exotic plants. Sometimes the most memorable spaces are built around flowers that simply make people feel happy. Another reason Shasta daisies work so well in cottage gardens is because they stay attractive throughout the season. Even as older flowers begin fading, fresh blooms continue opening, so the plants rarely appear empty or tired. And when planted in larger groups, they create flowing drifts of white flowers that move beautifully in the wind. That movement matters more than many people realize. Great gardens don't only look beautiful in photographs. They feel alive when you walk through them. 8. Lavender. Lavender may be one of the few plants that combines beauty, fragrance, resilience, pollinator support, and low maintenance all at once. In fact, many gardeners damage lavender not by neglecting it, but by trying too hard to care for it. Lavender evolved in dry, rocky Mediterranean climates, filled with intense sunlight and poor soil. Because of that, rich, wet conditions often weaken the plant instead of helping it. Lavender naturally prefers tougher growing conditions, and that toughness makes it perfect for cottage gardens. During hot, dry summers when many flowers begin struggling, lavender often remains calm and healthy. Its silver-green foliage reflects sunlight while helping conserve moisture, allowing the plant to stay attractive even before flowering begins. But once the purple flower spikes appear, the atmosphere of the entire garden changes. The fragrance alone transforms outdoor spaces. On warm evenings, lavender releases a soft, calming scent that drifts through pathways and seating areas, instantly making gardens feel peaceful and relaxing. Pollinators absolutely cover lavender during peak bloom season. Bees especially seem unable to resist it. Large lavender plantings almost vibrate with movement during summer afternoons, as pollinators move constantly between flowers. And that pollinator activity benefits the entire garden ecosystem. Another major advantage is versatility. Lavender works beautifully as a border plant, a pathway plant, pollinator plant, herb, and dried flower. Very few plants serve so many purposes at once. And unlike flowers that disappear completely after blooming, lavender continues adding structure and beauty through much of the year because of its evergreen foliage in many climates. That year-round texture becomes incredibly valuable in garden design. Its cool gray-green foliage also pairs beautifully with almost every flower color. Lavender especially complements roses, creating one of the most iconic cottage garden combinations ever. Soft purple lavender beneath warm pink or creamy white roses creates a timeless romantic atmosphere. And because lavender stays fairly compact and structured, it helps anchor looser, sprawling cottage plants nearby. Another hidden strength is how little maintenance it requires once established. Lavender usually needs far less water than most flowering plants. Too much fertilizer often reduces blooms, and excessive moisture can damage the roots. So instead of rewarding constant attention, lavender rewards restraint. That's part of why gardeners become so attached to it. Lavender proves that some of the most beautiful plants thrive best when allowed to grow naturally without too much interference. And perhaps that's one of the real secrets behind unforgettable cottage gardens. The flowers that truly succeed are rarely the ones demanding perfection. They're the plants capable of handling real-world conditions while still filling gardens with fragrance, movement, pollinators, and beauty year after year. Picture walking out onto your balcony, patio, or even a tiny windowsill and being greeted by overflowing pots of healthy green plants. Full of life no matter how often you forget to water them, how intense the summer heat becomes, or how chaotic your schedule gets. It sounds unrealistic, but some plants are built exactly for that kind of environment. There are container plants that actually perform better with a little neglect. Plants that recover after drying out, survive cramped pots, and continue growing as if nothing ever happened. In today's video, we're looking at 10 incredibly durable container plants that are almost impossible to kill. And believe it or not, the very first plant on this list is one many people completely underestimate. 1. Marigolds. Marigolds are often considered some of the toughest flowers you can grow, and they've earned that reputation. These plants are durable, adaptable, and extremely dependable in containers, even when growing conditions are less than ideal. What makes marigolds so resilient is their ability to handle stress with ease. Strong sunlight, dry soil, and low nutrients rarely slow them down. In fact, they often thrive in situations that would weaken more delicate plants. Their root systems are compact, yet efficient, which makes them especially suited for pots and containers. They don't require deep or nutrient-rich soil to grow successfully. Even in basic potting mix, marigolds establish quickly and begin flowering fast. One of their best qualities is non-stop blooming. Once marigolds begin producing flowers, they continue throughout the season without much interruption, constantly adding bright color to containers and balconies. But marigolds offer more than appearance alone. The plants naturally produce compounds in their roots and foliage that may help discourage certain pests. While they aren't a perfect solution, they're often used near vegetables and herbs to help reduce insect pressure in container gardens. That means marigolds provide several benefits at once: bright, long-lasting flowers, low maintenance care, potential pest support. They're also forgiving when it comes to watering. Marigolds tolerate occasional drought surprisingly well and usually recover quickly if they dry out. In many cases, too much water becomes a bigger problem than too little. Sunlight is where they perform best. Full sun encourages stronger growth, more compact plants, and heavier blooming. They can survive in partial shade, but flower production often decreases. Another advantage is how easily they respond to simple maintenance. Removing faded blooms encourages fresh flowers to form even faster, but even if you ignore them completely, marigolds still continue growing and blooming. In containers, marigolds are quick to establish, extremely durable constant bloomers. They don't require perfection. They don't punish small mistakes. They simply keep growing and filling spaces with color, season after season. 2. Nasturtium. Nasturtium is one of the most surprisingly resilient container plants you can grow, and unlike many flowers, it often performs better in poor conditions than in perfect ones. Most plants demand rich soil and regular feeding. Nasturtium prefers the opposite. When planted in overly fertile soil, it usually produces huge amounts of leaves but fewer flowers. But give it lean soil, fewer nutrients, and a little neglect, and it suddenly becomes covered in colorful blooms. That unusual behavior is part of what makes it so fascinating. Its roots are lightweight and efficient, allowing the plant to adapt quickly to containers without needing much space or deep soil. Rather than aggressively competing for nutrients, nasturtium simply works with whatever conditions it receives. Watering is also flexible. The plant tolerates dry spells much better than most flowering annuals. Growth may slow slightly during drought, but nasturtium rarely collapses completely. Once watered again, it quickly resumes growing. Another reason gardeners love nasturtium is its versatility. Depending on the variety, it can stay compact and bushy in pots, spill gracefully over container edges, climb lightly when given support. This makes it perfect for balconies, hanging baskets, rail planters, and decorative patio containers. But nasturtium isn't only decorative, it's useful too. Both the flowers and leaves are edible, carrying a peppery flavor similar to arugula. Few container plants combine ornamental beauty, edible harvests, and low-maintenance growth so successfully. Like marigolds, nasturtium may also help with pest control. Gardeners often use it as a trap plant to attract insects away from vegetables and other valuable crops. Full sun encourages stronger flowering, but nasturtium also handles partial shade better than many blooming plants. In sunnier spots, it produces more flowers, while shadier conditions encourage extra foliage growth. One of the most impressive things about nasturtium is how well it responds to neglect. Less fertilizer often means more flowers. Less water can create fuller, compact growth. Poor soil usually improves blooming performance. In containers, nasturtium becomes almost effortless to grow. Very little feeding, minimal watering, almost no pruning. It spreads, flowers, and thrives while asking for very little attention in return. This plant isn't just tough, it's naturally designed to succeed where many other container flowers fail. 3. Mint isn't simply a hardy plant, it grows with incredible determination. In containers, that aggressive nature actually becomes one of its greatest strengths. Once mint settles in, it develops a thick underground system of spreading roots known as rhizomes. These roots constantly search for new space and continue sending up fresh shoots. Even when the top of the plant looks dry, wilted, or heavily cut back, the roots underneath usually remain active and alive. One of the most surprising things about mint is how quickly it recovers from neglect. When the soil becomes too dry, the leaves often droop dramatically, and the plant can appear almost dead. But once water is added, mint rebounds extremely fast, sometimes within just a few hours. Another reason mint thrives in containers is how well it reacts to harvesting. Many plants weaken after being trimmed, but mint responds by becoming even fuller. Every cut encourages multiple new stems to form, creating thicker, bushier growth over time. This makes mint especially useful in pots because it quickly fills containers with dense greenery, naturally crowds out weeds. It continuously produces fresh leaves for harvesting. Mint is also more flexible with lighting conditions than many herbs. Although it prefers partial sun, it can tolerate full sun with occasional watering and still survives reasonably well in lighter shade. Soil quality is rarely a major issue. Mint grows happily in average potting mix, and excessive fertilizer can actually weaken its flavor by reducing the concentration of aromatic oils. One important thing to remember is that mint should usually be grown alone in its own container. Its aggressive root system can easily overwhelm neighboring plants if they share the same pot. And beyond its toughness, mint keeps rewarding you constantly. Fresh leaves can be used in tea, cold drinks, cooking, desserts, or simply enjoyed for their refreshing scent whenever you brush past the plant. Mint isn't the type of herb that disappears after one mistake. It keeps returning, regrowing, and thriving again and again. 4. Basil is often thought of as a delicate herb, but in reality, it's one of the fastest growing and quickest recovering plants you can grow in containers. Its biggest strength is speed. When basil receives enough warmth and sunlight, it grows incredibly fast. New leaves appear constantly, stems stretch upward rapidly, and the plant can become twice its size in a surprisingly short time. That fast growth makes basil very forgiving. Even if watering becomes inconsistent or harvesting isn't perfect, the plant often compensates by simply producing more growth. Unlike mint, basil focuses most of its energy above the soil rather than spreading underground. Every stem has the ability to branch outward, and the way you harvest the plant plays a huge role in how productive it becomes. When basil is cut correctly, just above a leaf node, the stem splits into multiple new branches. Repeating this process gradually transforms a small, thin plant into a thick, rounded bush packed with leaves. Interestingly, a small amount of stress can sometimes improve basil's flavor. Slight dryness or moderate stress often encourages the plant to produce stronger aromatic oils, making the leaves even more fragrant. Basil does, however, have one major requirement: warmth. It thrives in heat and sunlight, but struggles in cold temperatures. In containers, placing basil somewhere with at least 6 hours of direct light can dramatically improve growth and productivity. Watering should remain fairly regular, though perfection isn't necessary. Basil dislikes staying dry for long periods, but it usually recovers quickly from occasional missed watering. Good drainage is especially important because soggy roots can damage the plant far more than short dry spells. One of the secrets to keeping basil productive for longer is preventing it from flowering too early. Once flowers begin forming, the plant shifts energy away from leaf production. Frequent harvesting helps delay flowering and keeps the plant fuller and more useful. In containers, basil becomes an extremely rewarding plant because fast growth allows repeated harvesting. Regular pruning improves shape and density. Constant leaf production keeps it productive all season. Unlike some herbs that respond slowly, basil reacts almost immediately to the way it's treated. Good conditions lead to explosive growth, while even after small mistakes, the plant often recovers surprisingly quickly. The result is a container herb that feels energetic, productive, and constantly alive. And once you experience the taste and aroma of fresh basil picked directly from your own pot, store-bought basil rarely feels the same again. 5. Cherry tomatoes. Cherry tomatoes are one of the few container plants that combine fast growth, resilience, and non-stop productivity. Even when grown in pots, they behave like plants that are determined to keep producing no matter what. Part of what makes cherry tomatoes so dependable is how quickly they recover from stress. Miss a watering or deal with a stretch of intense heat, and the plant may droop temporarily or slow down slightly. But once conditions improve, it usually bounces back fast and continues growing without much trouble. Unlike larger tomato varieties that can be demanding and sensitive, cherry tomatoes are far more forgiving. They don't require perfect conditions to begin producing fruit. Even in relatively small containers, many varieties flower early and continue setting fruit throughout the season. One of their biggest advantages is how they grow in cycles rather than in a single harvest period. Even under mild stress, whether from heat, inconsistent watering, or small nutrient imbalances, the plant continues trying to flower and produce fruit. That's one reason beginners often succeed with cherry tomatoes even when other crops fail. Many varieties also have an indeterminate growth habit, which means they continue growing and producing over time, don't stop after a single harvest. They keep adapting as the season progresses. In containers, this growth can be managed very easily with simple supports. A small cage, stake, or trellis helps keep the plant upright, while light pruning improves airflow and reduces stress on the stems. Frequent harvesting also encourages the plant to continue producing even more fruit. Sunlight is the main thing cherry tomatoes truly need. Around 6 to 8 hours of direct sun dramatically improves production. But even with slightly less light, the plants usually continue growing and fruiting, just more slowly. Watering doesn't need to be flawless, although steady moisture helps improve fruit quality. Irregular watering may cause occasional splitting, but it rarely stops the plant from producing entirely. One of the most rewarding things about cherry tomatoes is the momentum they create. At first, you harvest only a few fruits. Then, suddenly, there are dozens. Before long, you're picking fresh tomatoes almost every day. Growing them feels less like maintaining a plant and more like running a tiny food-producing system right on your balcony or patio. 6. Spider plant. Spider plants are famous for being nearly impossible to kill. Not because they grow aggressively, but because they adapt to almost any condition you give them. Their greatest strength is flexibility. Spider plants don't rely on perfect lighting, exact watering schedules, or ideal humidity. Instead, they simply adjust to whatever environment they're placed in. In lower light, growth slows down, but the plant keeps surviving. In brighter light, it grows faster and produces more offshoots. Dry indoor air rarely bothers it much at all. That adaptability is what makes spider plants so dependable in containers and indoor spaces. The leaves themselves are built for survival. Long, arching, and slightly thickened, they store enough moisture to help the plant handle occasional neglect. If watering is forgotten for a while, the plant may look a little dull or faded, but once watered again, it usually recovers steadily. But the real secret behind the spider plant's resilience is how it reproduces. The plant sends out long stems called runners, and at the ends of those runners, tiny baby plants begin forming. These spiderettes are more than decorative. They are fully developed young plants capable of rooting the moment they touch soil. This creates a constant self-renewing cycle. The main plant continues surviving. New baby plants form continuously, Each offshoot can become a completely new plant. Even if the parent plant weakens over time, the next generation is already growing and ready to replace it. In hanging baskets and containers, these cascading baby plants create a lush, layered appearance that makes the plant feel full and vibrant with almost no effort. Another major advantage is how well spider plants tolerate crowded roots. Many houseplants struggle when confined in small pots, but spider plants often grow even better when slightly root-bound. Their care requirements are extremely simple. Moderate light works best, though they tolerate less water occasionally without needing a strict schedule. Minimal fertilizer is required. And perhaps the most valuable quality of all is how calmly spider plants handle stress. Where more sensitive plants decline quickly after mistakes, spider plants usually stabilize, adapt, and recover on their own. They may not be the fastest growing or most dramatic plants available, but they are among the most dependable. A spider plant can quietly thrive for years in the background, continuing to grow no matter how unpredictable life becomes. 7. Thyme. Thyme is far more than just a hardy herb. It's naturally designed to thrive in harsh conditions. Once you understand how the plant survives, growing it in containers becomes surprisingly easy. Unlike fast-growing herbs that depend on constant moisture and nutrients, thyme focuses on efficiency and endurance. Its leaves are tiny, slightly tough, and rich in aromatic oils. Those oils do more than create fragrance and flavor. They also help the plant reduce water loss and protect itself from heat and dry conditions. That's why thyme reacts very differently to drought compared to softer herbs. When moisture becomes limited, thyme doesn't collapse or panic. Instead, it slows its growth, conserves energy, and waits for better conditions. Even after long dry periods, the plant often recovers with little visible damage. Its woody lower stems are another important survival feature. As thyme matures, the base becomes harder and stronger. The plant grows more drought-tolerant. Fresh growth focuses on the softer new tips. This creates a balance between stability and productivity. The woody base supports the plant long-term, while the newer green growth stays productive for harvesting. That's also why proper pruning matters. Harvesting only the soft green tips encourages continuous renewal. Cutting too deeply into the woody stems, however, can slow recovery significantly. Another overlooked strength is thyme's root behavior. Even in small containers, the roots remain controlled and efficient rather than aggressive. Instead of constantly spreading, they focus on maximizing water absorption and adapting to limited space. This makes thyme ideal for container growing over long periods without needing constant repotting. Its natural growth habit also helps it thrive in pots. Thyme forms low-spreading mounds that create good airflow, even sunlight exposure, and very little maintenance work. Interestingly, excessive moisture is often more dangerous to thyme than drought. Poor airflow and wet soil can weaken the plant because thyme evolved in dry Mediterranean-like climates. In many ways, thyme performs best under slightly tougher conditions. Lean soil creates stronger growth. Less water improves resilience. More sun increases aromatic oils. Too much fertilizer can actually reduce quality by producing weaker growth with less concentrated flavor. Over time, thyme becomes increasingly self-sufficient in containers. It naturally controls its own growth, maintains its compact shape, and rarely becomes difficult to manage. And perhaps the most impressive thing about thyme is that older plants often become even tougher and more resilient with age. It may not grow dramatically or attract instant attention, but thyme survives with quiet consistency year after year. 8. Oregano survives differently than thyme. Instead of focusing mainly on slow endurance, oregano relies on flexible, adaptable growth. This is a plant that constantly looks for opportunities to expand. When planted in open ground, it spreads outward quickly. But when grown in containers, it adapts by becoming denser, fuller, and more productive within the limited space available. Its stems stay softer and more flexible longer than thyme's, which helps oregano recover quickly after trimming. In fact, heavy harvesting often encourages the plant to grow even more vigorously. That's one of oregano's biggest strengths. It responds positively to interaction. The more frequently you harvest, the more side shoots develop. The fuller and bushier the plant becomes, the longer it stays young and productive. If left untouched for too long, oregano can eventually become woody and sparse. but regular cutting keeps the plant dense, fresh, and actively growing. Its leaves are slightly larger and softer than thyme leaves, but they still contain strong aromatic oils that help protect the plant from heat and water loss, while intensifying flavor during mild stress. And much like thyme, oregano often becomes more flavorful when conditions are slightly challenging rather than perfect. Another advantage is oregano's flexible growth speed. In warm, sunny weather, it grows rapidly. During cooler periods or less ideal conditions, it simply slows down instead of failing completely. This makes oregano extremely forgiving in containers where growing conditions constantly change. Hot daytime temperatures, cooler nights, inconsistent watering schedules. Oregano doesn't demand perfect stability, it simply adjusts. Its roots are also highly adaptable. When space is available, they expand. In tighter containers, they compress efficiently and continue functioning well without becoming overly aggressive. That flexibility allows oregano to perform successfully in both small pots and larger containers. As it matures, oregano naturally forms a rounded, bushy shape. Outer stems begin trailing slightly while inner growth thickens, creating a dense canopy that helps protect soil moisture while still maintaining airflow. Another reason oregano is beginner-friendly is how well it handles pruning mistakes. If you trim too heavily, it regrows. If cuts are uneven, it reshapes itself naturally. Even if you forget to harvest for a while, the plant usually keeps going. Very few herbs are that forgiving. Interestingly, too much fertilizer and water can actually weaken oregano over time. Fast, lush growth often means weaker stems, lower oil concentration, and less intense flavor. So like thyme, oregano often performs best with moderate care rather than excessive attention. In long-term containers, oregano becomes remarkably self-managing. It adjusts its size to the pot, balances growth naturally, and continues producing usable leaves without strict maintenance routines. Perhaps oregano's greatest quality is consistency. It may not spread as aggressively as mint or grow as compactly as thyme, but it balances the strengths of both. Steady growth, reliable harvests, very low maintenance. It's the type of herb that quietly fills a container, keeps producing season after season, and asks for very little in return.